But we've got problems still. Wouldn't it be cool if this was the church that Elvis came to? Or some of his friends. After our Thanksgiving meal that we had for the youth, we had so much leftover food, we asked some people where we can go to give this food to people who need it. Nobody in the church, and I'm at fault. I didn't know. None of us knew where the homeless people were. You know how many bridges I went and peeked under? I was told they lived under this bridge or this bridge. Nobody was for certain. I had all this food to give. And we couldn't find anyone to give it to because we hadn't done our job. Church I grew up in, we had something called Soul Patrol. My parents started it. We would go out on Saturdays and we would witness. I'd be in a stroller handing out tracts. On Sunday, the bus would go out and pick them all up and bring them. You know where they sat? In the front row. Picked up all the homeless, picked up the people who were living in the shelters. They sat right in the front row. Then after service, we fed them. Cooked a meal for them. My mother started something called the Father's Closet. It was a little, literally a tiny little under stairs little thing. And we had all these clothes in there. They could come. You know how many mothers and fathers came in there and got clothes for their kids who didn't have any other way to get clothes for school? My parents opened their home. I could start naming names. Pedro, Jesus, Greg, Don. Of these guys who came to our house and lived with us, who had nowhere else to go. From that ministry, we started a halfway house. The halfway house is now in Lighthouse Assembly of God in Worcester, Massachusetts. A church on the bottom floor, a place for people who desperately need help upstairs. I don't know where all those guys are, but I know right now that Don Wilson is an amazing man of God. Married, doing phenomenal. Greg Bozick is a minister. Pray for him. He has some cancer issues going on. Pray for him. The Lord brought him from destitution to being a minister. But what would have happened had we not loved them enough to bring them into church? What would have happened had we not loved them enough to bring them into our home? What would have happened if we had said, we don't have a place for you? Our friend Gray Wolf, Native American guy, crazy. He'd come live with us. These people would show up at like 2, 3 in the morning. I'd wake up on the couch because there'd be some guy in my bed that needed a bed. They'd always get me out before I wet the bed so that they could go in. I'm kidding. We need to be a place where everybody can find God. If we turn up our noses, we could do an hour on this alone. Whatever you do under the least of these, but God has called us to be the least when he said, be a servant of all. So we need to be the least to the least. We're to be a channel of God's purpose to build a body of saints being perfected in the image of his Son. We need to make disciples. We need to demonstrate God's love and compassion to the world. And I'm going into my third point now. The problem that we have as a church, we have lost sight of the goal. We've lost sight of the prize. Do you know how many people, they work out for a particular thing, a particular sport? Jay Cutler, I heard someone say it the other day, really good quarterback, throwing the ball for the Bears. But everybody keeps saying this, he's just not a big game quarterback. What does that mean? What does it mean when someone says that? What if I got up here and someone said, well, he's just not a big service preacher. He needs to stick with the youth. Or he needs to stick with the kids. You don't want to hear that about yourself. But if you lose sight of what the prize is, if you lose sight of what the purpose is, if I lose sight of the fact that I don't want you to just come here and have a good service, I want you to come here and hear from God. If you're not coming here to hear from God, I'll be honest, I had to check myself on this. I'm going to take this video and I'm going to put it in a place where some of my family can see it. Some of my family have never seen me preach. Some of my family will probably never set foot in a church, so that's why they've never seen me preach. So, if I was, as I was thinking about that, I was like, man, if I get up here and I preach and I say this and I do this and all that sort of stuff and I have this cool illustration, maybe they'll think, hey, that was awesome, and maybe they'll start doing something and going to church and God kind of said, hey, are you trying to put on a good show? Or do you want to hear from me for my people? I had to take a step back. Say, God, I got lost. I got lost in what I was doing. I need to hear from you for your people, God, please. The Bible tells us in 1 Thessalonians that we're supposed to encourage one another with the words that those who are alive and remain will be caught up in the air. We as a church, here's why we look the same as the world. Because we have gotten so enthralled. We've gotten so caught up with living for the blessing of God. God, I want to be blessed by God. I want to be blessed by God. I want to be blessed by God. Well, you know what? The blessings of God on this earth will never satisfy. Do you know why they won't? Because they're only a glimpse of the real, true prize, and that's eternity with Him. Heaven. I'm going to heaven.